Okay, settle into your seats. We will get started with the afternoon session. Again, my name is Graham Wright, and this morning I think we got a really great overview of sort of the big picture of what's involved in going to several countries, what's going on in Israel, and some case studies of some successful companies that have come out of various provinces in Canada in terms of moving forward in the medtech space. This afternoon is bringing it more local, and particularly for the folks who may have a company and just trying to figure out how to get more involved in this game, or even the individual who says, this sounds like a wonderful area that I want to work in. How do I get started? And so what we want to focus on in this session is essentially what are the local resources, the innovation resources to help Canadian companies, and I'll also say Canadian entrepreneurs, start thinking about the process which will get them to go global. And I think we couldn't have a better keynote speaker to kind of ground us in this topic, particularly on how to do this in Toronto, than our keynote, Paul Santerre. I mean, Paul has been a center point in both the academic area, University of Toronto in engineering. He's been director of IBBME. He's a long-term academic. He's got more than 175 peer-reviewed publications. He's trained more than 60 graduate students, but also with an eye to innovation. He has more than 60 patents. He's in areas of medical polymers, biodegradation, and the like. He's a co-founder of Interface Biologics. And perhaps just to kind of really emphasize his strength in the area of innovation, in this past year, he received the Governor General's Award for Innovation, as well as the Professional Engineers of Ontario Entrepreneurship Award. So we're very honored today to have Paul Santerre come to give us a keynote on the subject of Canada's culture of innovation translation and how we're developing it here, the culture and the works of medical technology. Paul.
Great. Thanks a lot, Graham, for that nice introduction and the honor to be able to actually be here and talk to this group today. The numbers in the audience are really heartwarming compared to where the local mindset was in Toronto in 1993 when I arrived, and trying to find pairs and people to show us the way of how to do it. It literally wasn't there. So we've all come a very, very long way. We'll talk about some of the tools and resources that are available to us. Certainly like to personally thank Brad Strauss and Graham Wright and the whole team for having organized this today. And want to thank the speakers this morning, because they were truly outstanding. They made some great points, some very critical points that you just do not get in the classroom, and you do not get unless you get outside of U of T and the hospital ecosystem to be able to engage in those elements. And everything they said is part of the Bible with regards to this game. Okay, so the outline of the talk today, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience and hopefully establish a solid enough ground that you believe that I hopefully a little grain of salt of what I say is important. And then go from there into what I have been discussing for a long time with colleagues in campus of kind of what, the entrepreneurial spirit looks like on campus, and hopefully break down a few myths with regards to that. And then talk about a big resource that exists in Toronto here, the Health Innovation Hub that I'm co-founder of, which is trying to integrate and work very, very closely with programs like Medventions. We have 3 or 4 projects and have some even grander visions on the horizon for making what's happening here and what we are capable in the GTA of achieving on a global setting even more fantastic. and then summarizing it by some of the other resources that exist. You know, my last question to the speakers this morning wasn't by chance. This is something I think about a lot. You know, what's the capacity for us to absorb innovation in play? And there's lots of capacity, but we can't lose sight of the fact that there are finite resources, and those resources are heavily influenced by the purchasing powers that make the decisions on that. You heard about that this morning. So the good news is that there's great opportunity for innovation to come into play. It's estimated that about 30% of what we spend on healthcare, very, very broadly, is wasted money. It's inefficient. So better technologies that pay attention to the translational steps and activities that we talked about this morning are, there's lots of space for them still. And that's a good news for an environment such as ours, with such great creativity around it. So we should be involved. And this doesn't limit, the opportunity doesn't limit itself to hospitals. I mean, nursing homes, pharmaceutical industry, and so on and so forth, all bring opportunities to us. So my own story, interface, this is a slide that I normally present more so near the end of a typical talk on interface biologics, but I'm putting it up front so that I can put into context how the global thinking influenced us along the way, and there was a lot of surprises, a lot of learning, and this is a lot of that learning now goes into actually trying to teach the next generation of entrepreneurs in our ecosystem, along with many colleagues, of which several are here sitting in the audience, are participating with us trying to achieve this. Not unlike many of my other colleagues, our platform of research that went in the foundation and formation of interface biologics in 2001 emerged from research. The concept was very simple. Blood clotting was still a huge problem on a lot of surfaces in the body. The technologies that were being used had limitations in many various aspects, and we wanted to try to tackle this, but tackle it from in a manner that we could actually sell the concept of our product to industrial partners, that we could sell the value of it to the surgeons, and that conceptually it would have impact to the patients. But the first two groups were two key groups that we wanted to ensure would be players. We wanted to devise a surface modifying strategy that could eliminate manufacturing steps. Manufacturing steps and validation of every single one of those manufacturing steps is your Achilles heel in production, because the regulatory agencies are going to require you to validate every one. They require infrastructure and capital resources for everyone, and they require you to hire more people to manage and process any one. So eliminating any manufacturing step without giving away, of course, efficiency is a value add to your industrial manufacturers in play. And then secondly, that the technology actually works, has an impact for the patients. So we developed a strategy for generating what we call low molecular weight polymers, or oligomers, that could actually behave in every way, which way that a polymer does: processed, heat melt, extruded, fiber spun. So almost any process across the platform in almost any polymer, just like a colorant could, just like an antioxidant could, just like a slipping agent could be added to a polymer in order to endow it with a certain manufacturing property. Ours was going to endow surfaces with a diverse chemistry base that would minimize protein denaturation from blood and eliminate clotting. And we achieved that. We showed that on the bench, got patents on it in 2000, and we launched the company in 2001, Interface Biologics, with our first $1 million, and I ran that company until 2004. While still maintaining the academic responsibilities. And in 2004, when they got their first Series A, $10 million, I told them to go out and hire somebody full-time to do this, because I was having too much fun at the university. And I have remained, though, their chief scientific officer since then, overseeing a lot of their patent portfolio and driving their science and helping them position and create value position for their technologies in place. Very early on, we were involved on the international scene with multinationals. The philosophy, and probably not unlike many of my colleagues on campus, being able to take our technology and go knock on the door of the biggest manufacturer of catheter lines in the world, one of the biggest in the world, would seem to be the most logical step to getting your technology out there. But I think it was one of the speakers this morning, I can't remember which one, had said, I think it was a guy talking about the OEMs, be very, very careful when you engage with your partners and understand what are the driving forces and what influences them. Because we worked with a company for 6 years whose priorities within the company changed and varied, and our technology had to basically follow them because we were putting our technology in their product. And so if they sneezed, that means we had a cold, you know. And this happened until 2006, and then we said enough with this, and we went for a company that owned a much smaller share of the market, but was really, really hungry for a game differentiator and change, had manufacturing capabilities, had a great track record on validation and experience with getting new products across the FDA. We married those two things together and went from single digit to double digit. And today we're 60%, our technology is in 60% of that particular company's product line. Right? So that was a great experience and a big wake-up call for us that perhaps the small, medium-sized company that is really, really good at doing their niche thing is maybe your first best partner as you're moving towards creating and de-risking your product to get it on the marketplace. And that is something that's a message that I send across many, many times. The validation of those first products, needless to say, is something you can stand on and now go to bigger manufacturers. And since 2001, we've been working with Fresenius. It's the largest dialysis, membrane dialysis manufacturer in the world. And we are only months away from going our first in man on that product. And that will be transformative for the company because they currently use $5 to $6 worth of anticoagulant therapies on dialysis systems every time they do a dialysis procedure. There are millions of dialysis procedures done in North America alone. And there are 365 days in the year. So 365 times a million times $5, you can quickly see how a technology like ours would be very valuable to a company like that. And as a result, since then, you can just follow the line here. We probably have about 8 key partner products in development with countries from around the world with those technologies and a couple of our other oligomer technologies. We have 3 platforms that work on the same principle. So that clot problem is a huge one. Let's just pick catheters, for instance. In this particular area alone, if you just look in the US market alone, every time there's a deep vein thrombosis event, it costs about $15,000 US to deal with it. And that's $1 billion in cost savings. I bring that up specifically to show just one small example of how we can be making dents in that huge GDP expenditure and free up that money perhaps, and this was said nicely by Brian Courtney in his comments after my question this morning, that knowing if we're okay with this envelope of 17%, and we can free up dollars that are being wasted now, where are those new dollars going to go? And be starting to be thinking about the product opportunities in those types of areas. So this is a technology that is going to enable that type of chance. I've already said our competitors in this field basically were slipping agents that would be gooped onto catheter lines that could absorb in the material, change the modulus of the materials, or the introduction of heparin onto systems. And as soon as you put a biological onto a product, you now have to think about shelf life, stability, sterilization become nightmare problems for you. So if you could develop a synthetic product that actually enabled Mother Nature to do what it's been designed to do more naturally, without the biological, you're ahead of the game. So the additive concept is pretty simple. It's about a 2,000 molecular weight molecule, and here with a couple of different chemical blocks, and we can change those chemical blocks to accommodate everything from polypropylene to polyethylene to polyesters. So, you know, anybody who's designed product prototypes would know the value of being able to go into almost any base polymer and translate that to almost any application where protein, and in particular we have focused on cardiovascular and blood, would be an issue. The additive gets thrown into the hopper with the polymer resin, extruded out, and you have an instantaneous surface modification done at the time you manufacture product. No secondary coating manufacturing. Does it work? The top catheter line, it was the leading catheter line at the time, and probably still is because of its marketing power, but without any anticoagulant protection. In a loop study, that's the competitor's product at the top, clotted up. That's the Indexo catheter at the bottom. Okay, those 97% in vitro data that are here have pretty well translated into the clinical field. The table that you see down here on the bottom left represents the current DVT rates in clinical studies with this Indexo technology into these PICC catheter lines, so 1% or less. That means a dropping of DVT events from about 5% down to less than 1%. And that's a small percentage point, but over a broad population, if that was adopted right across the game, that would be billions of dollars in savings in the system. And the situation just gets better in terms of what the technology potentially could achieve in patients who have comorbidities. And that's what the graph down on the bottom right shows you. A real nice surprise that we got in our first clinical studies, one of our first leg clinical studies out of the University of Ottawa, 8,000 patients, is that our technology actually works better as a means of minimizing infections. If you don't have clots and proteins building up onto your catheters, you don't have the beds upon which bacteria can get a foothold and start to form biofilms. And we have about an 800% reduction in infection rates for patients who are on long-term chemotherapies with these PICC catheter lines. So that has opened up a whole new market opportunity for the company and interest from a lot of firms abroad. All right, so for better or for worse, I do think I do have some of the attributes of an entrepreneur, and I do firmly believe that it's critical for us to be embedding the option of entrepreneurship among within our training network, whether it's at the undergrad, grad, postdoc, or residency level, or mid-career faculty member clinician. It is very important for us to be changing that culture of psyche in this country, because there are huge problems to solve, and there are significant opportunities for us as a country in terms of job generation, better quality of life for our patients, and presence on the international market. So I have 5 myths that my colleagues at the University of Toronto in the entrepreneurial community have shared with me that I really like, and I try to embed these particular slides in every time I have the occasion. And the first myth is that the entrepreneur needs to be young. And I was 41 when we started Interface Biologics, and I was 50, I think, when we launched on the market with our first products in Canada. So not young, even though there's a lot of young faces in here. I'm not discouraging young faces. You guys go. You're going to lead Canada into the next generation. But there's a lot of wrinkles in the crowd as well, including my own. And I'm telling you, it's never too late. Get into it. And if you're over 55, there's probably a high probability that you'll probably have tried to launch a couple of companies in your lifetime. And I'm a very normal person. We have 2 new companies that are launching right now. And I won't reveal my age, but I am over 55. So, right. Characteristics, ask yourself if you have these. And if you don't have them and you're interested in entrepreneurship, go find people that have them, right? The ability to recognize opportunity. We saw some great stories this morning of individuals who've been able to recognize opportunity. We heard about resilience this morning. We heard about managing risks, what these people were doing. The last speaker who put in a few bets by recognizing how big the American market was, but recognizing that I can't have all my bets in one country, and did a phenomenal job of penetrating the Japanese market. He has de-risked, despite the fact that doing entrepreneurship activity is a risky business, but you manage your risk. Designing and actually delivering, effectuating are important. Myth 3 is that these ideas are always flashes of insight, and that's not necessarily true. It's an iterative process. There are insights, and these ideas bounce off one another, and you go forward with your spark. But we live on a planet with 8 billion people on it. The chances that somebody has not been sitting around thinking about the same problem is just high, very, very low probability. So what you need to be doing is networking, listening, seeing where the problems are, bringing pieces, recognizing valuable technologies, and bringing the opportunities together. That's the first thing that happens. So reassembling great ideas, iterative approaches, asking questions, and collaborating. I can't emphasize this point enough. This isn't data I generated. This is data that you can find out of some of the most written books on the probability of entrepreneurship. This very early phase is where many of us live in the University of Toronto system. So we may be completely oblivious to this one, all right? But the reality is, and I know this from personal experience, is that collaboration is key, especially at the stage where you are now going and taking in investor money and you're doing scale-ups and things along this nature. It is well recognized on average that a lot of our failures result from the inability for us to effectively know when we need to bring in collaborators, which collaborators to bring in, and when it is time perhaps for us to take a lesser role in that whole process, okay? Some food for thought. A lot of people who are the naysayers, perhaps in our ecosystem, this is not an easy trail to travel. There certainly wasn't in the early 1990s, a lot better now. But to convince your colleagues that you're not obsessed with the dollar. And these are stats that show most of us do this because we want to have impact. And then the other 30% do it because they want to build experience. There are very few of us who are driven by greed in this process. And that is very comforting for human nature, and it's a great defense against those who try to use that story against when trying to pit funding innovative science versus funding translation. The reality is they both need to exist, coexist, and we need to move both of them ahead. And we should never, ever let the two of them be pitted against each other. All right, so if you are in the Toronto environment, there are lots of incubators going on. At the University of Toronto, there's a central one that's focused entirely on healthcare. It's called the Health Innovation Hub. The mission is to educate, enable, and facilitate. There's absolutely no IP taken in the technology. We are simply using our experience and connecting it with some 40 different mentors now in the area of regulatory, manufacturing, business plan development. These are people coming out of industry. The philanthropy that exists in this city is phenomenal. So there's support for you. And it's coming from well beyond the university environment. And we try to draw that in together and work with the hospitals and their key opinion leaders within the hospitals to assist us on that. Just to show you how hot this is. So if you're thinking about this, you're not going to be alone. We launched in 2015 with 7 companies that brought in about $40,000 on their own to put into those companies and start building prototypes and whatnot. By the second year, we were at 29 companies that brought in $250,000 on their own. This is student driven, right? This is not faculty. This is not a faculty writing a grant on this stuff. And this past year, we were at 2.5 million and 60 companies. And this year, we already have 5 of our companies that hit the ball out of the park on their first $2 million investment. So our numbers will be even greater this year. So this is culturally catching on. It's a great opportunity to be able to use your education and your mind and your experience that you've had. You just need to be open to some of the very, very key important ground rules, such as the collaborations of activities that I've taught, the networking through the many, many events, including this great event here today that go on. There's lots of programs There's an accelerator program that we have. It's called I like to refer to it as Alcoholics Anonymous for Entrepreneurs. You sit around the table, you have a host like Saturday Night Live sitting around giving a topic that covers everything from market to business plan development to networking to building ideas, protecting ideas, you name it. And then the group actually solves each other's problems. There's a facilitator, and they just enable it to happen. There's a mini MBA that's running right now that has 60 students, 60 spots in it. For the past 3 years we've run it. There's 90 applicants, so that means there's strong, hungry. We run KOL sessions where you can have 5, 6 key opinion leaders giving you an opinion on your business plan, your technology pitch. You know, so very early on to capture the valuation, as you heard this morning, really early. And if you got it wrong, you want to know it really early and go down in flames and pivot and rejig early on before you spend a lot of money and time doing that. We spent a lot of effort on building partnerships with many different groups, as I said, from venture capitalists, key opinion leaders, and so on and so forth. These are the 10 points that we basically try to help you build with experts. And as you graduate from level 1 to level 4, hopefully by the time you get to the end of it, you are ready to pitch a good show to an investor group with prototypes, great team, a vision, a business plan, your value added elements all in place. Typical distribution of the startups that are in your ecosystem. So this is really real. These are our some 50 or so companies on the left-hand side distributed by hardware, services, and interventions. It's not just IT. It's physical devices. It's drugs and therapeutics. And the distribution is quite normal across the 4 levels as well. And no surprise there. It takes a lot of hard work to make it up to level 4. And I'm very pleased with the fact that we got the numbers that we have on the middle group, and it just seems to be getting better. So that's just the outline of nature of the activities. And this is just one of 9 campus-linked accelerators that exist on campus. There are health science technologies emerging out of 8 others, not as dense as what we have out of H2I. And we partner with all of them. Engineering has one, the business school called Creative Destruction Lab has one, and so forth. Just to show you that you're actually not alone in the ecosystem in terms of perhaps being very curious and interested in this whole area. There's a lot of activity at the course level, way at the top, where we're operating with campus-linked accelerators is down near the orange and the red level, and then the growth model is once you're out and you're in an investment. And these are the 10 different incubators, and historically, you know, this is something that has not just happened yesterday. This is something that has been transforming itself and emerging for the past 10, 15 years. Probably the oldest one, the Impact Center, was Santerre, downtown, established in 2000, but then you can see the flurry of activity that has emerged from about 2012 to 2014. So this is trending, this is cultural changing, and this will have impact on society. And at this point in time, I'd just like to acknowledge Cari and the team at the Health Innovation Hub and the team at Interface Biologics for allowing me to share part of their story with you today. And that's it.
Any quick questions for Paul? So I guess just you described these array of many services, the various incubators. What's the entry point? How does somebody get started in this? What's kind of step one?
Yeah, that's a great question. Each of those incubators, each incubator has its own entry point, and recognizing the diversity of the spectrum that we have in the healthcare sector, the different makeups of the teams. Some teams come in as pure engineers, and they haven't even contemplated what workflow. They don't even know what workflow is, and so the teams come in at different time and with different constraints on them. So in the Health Innovation Hub will take you in at any stage. we do an entry point. We ask you those 10 questions. We ask you to tell us where you are landed on those 10 questions, and depending on where you are, and we are completely, it really doesn't matter which of the 10 you have, right? But if you have less than 2 of them, then there's a bit of education to be done. If you have less than 5 of them, then you're probably still in the ideation stages and a lot of pivoting going on. If you have over 5 but less than 8, there's still some homework to be done now on prototyping and on building key business. So we'll take you in at the Health Innovation Hub anywhere. And so, for instance, a nice marriage that we've talked about with Medventions and whatnot, after students go through the exercise and their fall program and they get their ideas and whatnot, a big thing they need plugged to them is the mentor support to keep the idea going and momentum. So those companies can now come in, be defined within the spectrum of where they sit in those 4 levels, and now we start working with them to put resources at them. Those 9 accelerators on campus don't work independently. We actually have meetings once a month, and we do card changes. We actually talk about our companies and what the individual companies need and are in short supply on. So when I need a whole bunch of business smarts, we get those companies connected to the Creative Destruction Lab up at Rotman. If they need a whole bunch of a little bit more engineering power or software power, they might go to Dissel, or they may go to the Hatchery in engineering. So, and likewise, I mean, there are groups that we get that we've already identified that are perfect candidates for the Medventions programs and can get a dose load of knowledge and information through programs like that. The faster we start synergizing these elements, and then the sooner we will be able to service you. And our goal, I often say, I hope in 10 years I could see 100 interface biologics in the ecosystem here. And there is absolutely no reason why it can't happen.
That's great. Thank you, Paul. Okay, I think every speaker who's been associated with a company and getting a company started today has talked about one critical factor along the way that they have to address, and that's regulation. Obviously, when we're dealing with medical devices, medical technology that's going to be directly interacting with a person, you have to worry about safety. You have to worry about various stages before you can get to market. And so we're very honored today to have Ian Glasgow here. He's a senior evaluator with Health Canada, the Medical Devices Bureau, and specifically with the Cardiovascular group. Ian comes to us with a background in engineering and physiology. He came up through the University of Ottawa, working with their team in heart transplant. And I don't know if many of you are aware, but company World Heart really came out of those efforts, building one of the first artificial hearts, successful commercial artificial hearts in Canada, and moving that all forward. And so Ian had a great deal of experience in preclinical testing and the like in association with that, and working with World Heart in developing those artificial hearts, as well as working in software areas before he shifted over to Health Canada. So I think he comes at the evaluator perspective from the position of somebody who was coming up through the process trying to get devices looked at by Health Canada. And I think the topic he's got today is a very important one for us, especially, if you're going to start with your technology in Canada, if you're going to do initial patient studies in Canada, you've got to get your investigational technology authorization. But you don't want to have to be redoing things, especially in this discussion of going global. So thinking about how your regulatory experience in Canada can translate to other jurisdictions is another important question. So we're looking forward to Ian telling us about how Health Canada is taking action to support an atmosphere of innovation in healthcare. Ian?
Thank you. I'll give pause on the thank you, because typically a sole manufacturer comes to us, and they have to come into the dragon's den. And today the tables are reversed. I'm the lone regulator in front of all of you manufacturers, innovators, and clinicians. Today I want to present a short overview of what we do. I find in my conversations, formally and informally, that a lot of people are not aware of what we actually do and how we do it. And they're very familiar with what the FDA does, but not so much with Health Canada. After that, I'm going to go off on a different tangent on what we're seeing as a trend in innovation in Health Canada. And it's going to be very different from the traditional cardiovascular devices that we saw this morning. And I'm going to talk about what Health Canada is doing in response to that trend. Oh, just return will do. Okay. So, Health Canada is the federal department responsible for helping Canadians maintain and improve their health. That is our mandate. If you go to our website, if you can find our website, you will actually see that on the very first page. Health Canada plays an active role in ensuring Canadians have access to safe and effective products, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We are the federal regulator. The province is largely responsible for the delivery of healthcare. Sometimes people get mixed up on some of those, on where our fence stops and the province responsibilities lie. The products that we look at are typically drugs, genetic therapies, natural health products, and of course what you're interested in today is medical devices. We are not the manufacturer or the distributor of these products. Health Canada is not the only department that is responsible for bringing this mandate to Canada. We have the Public Health Agency of Canada, the Canadian Institute of Health Research, Patented Medicine Prices Review Board, and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. In general, the Food and Drugs Act is the law that defines what is not allowed. You're not allowed to sell a device that will hurt people. It's obvious, but it's in there. You're not allowed to represent a device in a deceiving manner. And trust me, I've seen some labeling that's very interesting in the claims they make. Whereas the medical device regulation, it takes the law and it applies it. The regulations, medical device regulations, outlines what you must do. So you must label a device with certain information. Any of you that are healthcare professionals see that little label. Everything on that label is actually in part 1 of the regulations, that it has to be there. You must maintain documents that prove the device is safe and effective. In other words, you need to have a quality management system. I don't think a lot of people, when I was working at World Heart, a lot of our software engineers came straight out of the telecommunications industry. And they would roll their eyes when our QA department came and said you had to document everything. They weren't going to allow to do a stitch of software development until they created a requirement spec. And they would say, well, this is not how we do things in the telecommunications industry. Well, it's all fine that we have documentation and we can skip it. I've known companies that design their products and then they backward engineer their documentation for a medical device. The problem is when something bad happens, that's the time you want the traceability to figure out what went wrong with your device. So documentation and having a quality management system is the linchpin of all medical device activities. You must obtain certain certifications and license to sell a device. In Canada, we have a Class 1, a Class 2, Class 3, and Class 4 device. A Class 1 is the device with the least amount of risk. A Class 4 with drug-eluting stent carries the most amount of risk. When you come to us, we will classify your device for you, and based on that classification, that's the amount of evidence that you need to provide to us. You must track on how many devices you sell in Canada and where they're sold. So for a drug-eluting stent, you would have an implant registration. You know which patient, what day that device was implanted. The reason why, again, traceability. If anything happens, we can trace that back. For example, for tissue valves made from porcine valves, we can trace it right back to the actual animal that valve was harvested from. We require that from a manufacturer. In a post-market realm, a manufacturer is responsible for reporting their problems associated with your device to Health Canada. So any incident related to your device, you are required by law to report it to us. In the future, we're also creating a mandatory reporting system for hospitals. So hospitals can just bypass the manufacturers and directly report their incidents to us. On the final right, we have guidance documents. These describe how to do things. This is, for example, this is how you apply for certain certification or licensing. So how do I do a license application? Or it could be more specific as, how do I label a specific device? This is how you report a problem. And some of the guidance are very specific. For example, we have a guidance directly related only to implantable cardiac leads. We also recognize certain standards, and i.e. IEC standards, ISO standards, among other standards that we recognize. And some of those standards, like the IEC 60601 family of electrical requirements, they explicitly state acceptance criteria and what results you should see. Standard like ISO 10993, which is with respect to biocompatibility, will tell you in general what you're supposed to do, but not the actual acceptance criteria. So standards will range from very specific to very broad. We recognize how we recognize standards. We actually review them. We actually see if they're applicable to the devices in our jurisdiction, and we actually write a report, and then we actually will put on a website, these are standards that you can declare conformity to. So here's a picture of all the activities that the medical device regulations will that you must do. There's pre-market obligations, and those are pre-market obligations by the manufacturers. As a manufacturer, you must register your product in Canada, and you do so via licensing. Again, as I said, you must have your documentation. These are requirement specs, design specifications, your quality plans, your quality test plans, your clinical protocol, your materials plans. You must have all that in order. The health minister can ask for any of that at any time for any class. We think, oh, well, we only have to provide that for class 4. I can come to a class 2 manufacturer and ask for this information. It is good manufacturing practice, it's good medical device development practice that you have this documentation no matter what the risk of your device. There are pre-market controls by Health Canada, and what we control is the registration of the product. So we control the licensing. We get a say on whether your product is going to be licensed in Canada or not. That license just means you can distribute it. You still have another fight with the provinces on whether they're going to cover it. Also, a manufacturer must have certification to ISO 13485, and that's the quality management system standard. And that tells you how to set up a quality management system in your company and what requirements should be instated. We actually have a third party that will go into a manufacturer and audit them to see that they are meeting quality management system requirements. There are post-market controls, and Health Canada, by law, can inspect any medical device company, be it in Canada or outside Canada, to ensure that they comply with the Food and Drug Act. Post-market obligations by the manufacturers is every year you must do renewal. So you get a license, but every year you need to pay a license fee, just like your car. You've got to pay a license fee for your car every year for your license. As I stated, a manufacturer is responsible for vigilance reporting, i.e. reporting an incident. In the middle is what my job is, and that's core requirements, and that's to ensure that the device is safe, effective, and that there's proper labeling. In doing so, a manufacturer at licensing time will create a submission with all of the information that they have gathered from their testing and provide it to us. This information could be electrical, mechanical, software, biocompatibility, sterilization, marketing history, clinical studies, animal studies, literature review. That's just off the top of my head. And we're required to look at each one of those. If that would be for class 4, there's less information for lower class devices. And we either ask you for more information, refuse you if it comes to that, or accept, make a recommendation that you license your product. So, we're here about innovation, okay? All that other stuff is kind of boring, may put you to sleep. Only the regulators here are interested in that. What is one of the biggest trends that we're seeing is with respect to digital health? And from this slide, you can see traditionally we had devices in the hospital, for example, an ICD. If you wanted to speak to it, you would use a magnetic head on a programmer to look at the ICD, a CRT, or a pacemaker. Nowadays, that device can speak via Bluetooth low energy to some mobile device, and a clinician with an iPad or an iPhone or an Android-based phone can actually see the diagnostics out of those devices. You still need a programmer to make changes, but a clinician can be at his home for certain companies and see these diagnostics. They can be third-party consulted through a clinician that is at the hospital. You no longer have to, manufacturers are bypassing making their own proprietary hardware and utilizing off-the-shelf hardware to send information out. A lot of these companies have their own server farms where all this information is uploaded, and a clinician can connect to these servers to see diagnostics on the clinician. All the alarms are sent up. These alarms can be sent to the clinicians or sent on a daily basis if the clinician wants to see it. And you can now tell the patient, should I go into the hospital or not? Previously, patients would have to come into the hospital for a follow-up. On the left, we're also seeing consumers getting involved in healthcare. Now we have Garmin's, TomTom's, Polar devices, Fitbit devices that are doing a very low base of diagnostics on you with what we say consumer health. But I know students in university have now taken these devices and trying to use it to say monitor ECG patterns to replace Holter monitors which we put on for 24-hour access to collect data. So why this digital revolution? One is to reduce efficiencies. As one presenter alluded to this morning, healthcare costs are not decreasing. We need to find ways to create efficiencies in a clinical environment. One of those ways, and there's literature to support this, is to reduce in-clinic visits by patients. I wish I had remote monitoring for our artificial heart patients that were discharged as far as, say, Sudbury. If there was a problem, I would have to travel to Sudbury to actually go see that patient or make that patient come in. That's a lot of time and money on that patient's part, and a lot of downtime, me waiting for that patient to travel 4 hours, unless I ask for an ambulance, air ambulance to bring them, which is even a greater cost. Improve access. Whitehorse, Northwest Territories, some centers in Canada don't have a heart institute. You have one. You have a well-defined heart cardiology center here in Toronto, but it's not the same for every community. We now have technology that allows that sort of access. Patients can be at home. They can now have an iPhone connected to their neurostimulator. The doctor has already set the range on the neurostimulator, and the patient can increase or decrease the amount of stimulation by the neurostimulator for chronic pain management. So patients are now getting involved or participating in their own patient care. reduce costs. I already stated that in-clinic visits, reducing them or decreasing follow-ups is a cost reducer. Increased quality. Smart pumps, smart infusion pumps, they're directly connected to a patient database. That patient database now will take in the correct prescription by the doctor on what drugs are supposed to be infused. If the nurse happens to punch the wrong button for that patient and it's the wrong drug, the smart infusion pump will now prevent that healthcare provider from putting in the wrong drug for them. So you can improve the quality of care. You can reduce the number of mistakes within the clinical environment. Making medicine more personalized. Like I said, a patient with an iPhone at home can now up or decrease their stimulation for pain management. This is a quote from Senator Ogilvie, from the chair of the Senate Committee on Social Affairs, Science and Technology. And they put out a report on 2017 on integrating robotics, artificial intelligence, and 3D technologies. Patients used to, and they still do, give us grief for actually approving a device that is, they say, is harming Canadian citizens. Breast implants is a prime example of that. Most recently, vaginal meshes, you saw that was in the media space, and some patients were complaining about that. But patients are no longer just coming to Health Canada and giving us grief for things we have approved. They're giving us a hard time for things we have not approved. They have access to a whole bunch of information. I've known patients that have come into the cardiologist, already have chosen their valve, known which valve they want. To their dismay, the clinician tells me, well, this is the sole manufacturer contract we have with this. You're only getting this valve. But they have access to the information. They're demanding. MS patients, they were demanding that Health Canada push for a clinical trial on implanting stents in the carotid artery. They were pushing for it. We had to respond, even though we didn't have any evidence pointing to the fact that they could, that this was going to be effective. So the question remains, what is Health Canada doing to respond to this digital health revolution that we're seeing? Regulations, complicated, boring, can't go over them, can't go around them, can't go under them. You've got to go through them. And as you can see, it's a big black hole, very scary. And what I'm finding with the digital health revolution, my problem is not with the St. Jude's and the Abbotts and the Strykers and the Medtronics of the company. They have very mature, long-standing regulatory offices with lots of money. It's the small innovators, some of you, that have no clue and have no money at the end of the day on what we need to do to get our product in there. Because you've spent a lot of money. It's a lot of money even just getting it to clinical trial. I remember we were close to almost triple digits and hundreds of $1 million on what we were needed to get our artificial heart to trial. And we had the money for a regulatory environment. We're going to see lots of innovators, just like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, building right out of their garages. I myself can go on a website, buy sensors for less than $4,000, attach it to a Raspberry Pi microprocessor, and be up with some sort of medical device in less than a month. So we have to respond to that. So one of the ways that we can do so, to go backwards. How can we improve the number of days it takes to issue a license? I've heard this morning how many days it takes. According to one website, a class 4 will take 6 to 8 months, class 3, 4 to 5, class 1 to 2. I bet you some of you would dare to have a good discussion with me on whether those numbers are accurate. And I don't mean in a less than 6 to 8 months way. We have seen the stats. We need to do a better job on how can we get companies to get their products out in the market. In a digital health, you have very short life cycles. Changes can occur like this. Hardware, it takes a while. I can make a change to software at any time. A lot of companies, it's my belief that companies can submit a perfect review. The problem is we don't tell them how to. And if you've ever been to our website, I can tell you it's not, I'm embarrassed of our website. It's not easy to navigate through our website. The information is not readily available. We need to do a better job. We recognize that we need to do a better job. How so? We've decided to go on 2 different ways on developing an innovative and a structured mechanism to allow Health Canada to engage and communicate with medical device owners. And one is through preclinical meetings, and the other through electronic meeting. Right now, you come to us at a very late stage with no pre-submission interaction. What we're proposing is that we get in touch with you at an earlier point. For example, sound bites. They'd be very disappointed coming to us, having done their clinical studies and all their preclinical, and we tell them at a late stage, oops, you're missing this. They would not be too happy. They would say, now we have to go back. It's going to cost us another year or 2 years of time. That's time and money that they may not have. So we would like to lay out clear expectations, the exact evidence that you need, and trying to get faster reviews and to create a more positive regulatory decision. So I don't want to be the door at the end of the pathway. I want to be the gate that you open at the beginning of the pathway, and you're having a conversation with us along the whole life cycle, or at least along the whole pre-market life cycle. We used to have, now we have informal meetings with no clear guidance for industry or Health Canada. We're going to create a more formal, structured meeting process with clear meeting criteria and outcomes. I'm talking at a very high level right now because I'm not allowed to provide you the details as we're still working on it. Currently, information is disseminated through guidance documents, one-on-one telephone calls, if you can get us, meetings, and emails, if I can find them through the thousands that I receive. I know most of you don't look at your information at home. You're using YouTube and all sorts of other information. So what is e-learning? We're thinking of using a screening recording tool. So what do I mean by that? A screening recording tool can prompt the user through various software and website screens in order to help them understand how to navigate. So it's just like an ad hoc help menu that you can scroll through. We will do something like a YouTube where you have a narrated training presentation that allows a narrator to explain details while more general summary information images are displayed on the screen as you click through each category on a new screen. The narration begins, and I give you a more, this is how you actually do it. This is the form you need, instead of just reading it through a guidance document.
Attention please. Code Whyne, D, Delta Wave, 4th floor, report room. Attention please, Code Whyne, D, Delta Wave, 4th floor, report room.
Again, we want to do scrollable mini courses, which presents text and images in an interactive manner where the user can scroll through in each part of the course. So in essence, the way we present our information needs to come up to the 21st century. And we have a real innovator. The person who's working on this is excellent. Just happens to be younger than me, and he's really into this stuff. But he's done a great job, and he has a good plan laid out for how we need to interact with you in the future. So in short, these are what we want is to improve medical device access to Canadians, to improve health outcomes. We want to make Canada a more attractive research environment. This before lunch or during lunch, we had a discussion on only manufacturers are allowed to submit an ITA submission. You clinicians are actually stuck. You have probably using a device off-label and you would like to go through a more formal process. I'm constantly hearing from clinicians, we would like to do a clinician-sponsored clinical trial, but we don't have a mechanism. These are things that we need to look at. The bottom is a couple of the indicators that we need to go through that we're going to use to, or metrics that we're going to use to measure whether things that we implement actually are better than the old school methods. Well, I'm just going to skip through this. So, radiation, digital health, what are we doing? We have 4 divisions right now. We are actually going to create a new division called the Radiation Emitting and Digital Health Division. Radiation emitting devices are your typical CT, X-ray, mammography, laser emitting devices. But the digital health one is the one that's going to be the new division that we're going to create. And our objectives of it is this is how we are going to advance or adapt our regulatory approach to respond to the system needs. And in this case, the digital health revolution. So we're going to try and create targeted review processes for how do we create a review process for large volumes of digital health products, such as wireless medical devices, mobile medical device apps, telemedicine, software as a medical device. And what we want to do is have evaluators that have a specific expertise with respect to doing digital health. In my section, I see a lot of the software as a medical device apps that sit on an iPad that connect to cardiac rhythm devices. That expertise may or may not move into the digital health. Not only will we be there as a review capacity, but we're going to be doing what I'm doing today, in which we're going to now be more aggressive in reaching out to you as stakeholders with respect to digital health and talking to you about disruptive technologies such as artificial intelligence or machine language. The other thing we're looking at is we're going to try and align with other regulatory agencies and health technical assessments in the provinces. One of these ways we're doing it, at the global level, we have, there's a guidance document or a document on software as a medical device. This by MDRF, which is the International Medical Device Regulatory Forum. It's a global harmonized approach on how do we deal with software as a medical device. There's 4 documents, one that defines what it is, another document that how do we categorize or classify these devices, how do we apply a QMS to software as a medical device, and how do we clinically evaluate. In response to that, we've created our own draft guidance document on software as a medical device. It's in the draft stage, and hopefully in the second quarter of this year, we're going to put it out for public comments, for you to have comments on what is in that. And in that document, we're going to say, how does your software as a medical device fit into our regulatory scheme of class 1, 2, 3, or 4 devices? We've also created a scientific advisory committee on digital health, and we have a really good one with respect to medical devices and cardiovascular. So we're using that model for digital health. And what we do is we reach out to, on a timely manner, mostly once a year, people that are in the scientific, technical, medical, or clinical realm to come to us, meet with us. We may have questions for you. And these panel members are going to provide guidance to us on how should we approach artificial intelligence. How do we approach health IT records, which now have medical device software components in it? And that's what we're going to be seeking guidance on. We had our first meeting with respect to scientific advisory on our guidance document. That was in January of 2018, and the subject was this guidance document. And as I said, that draft is going to be released in the second quarter, and we got some good feedback on what we need to do with respect to software as a medical device. I'm over, so I am going to stop. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you. While we're switching over, maybe if there's any quick questions.
Yeah, I've got a question about artificial intelligence. Yes, it's changing. How does a QMS deal with that? So do you have to constantly
You wanna
check
just
the quality of a system once it's been retrained with the data, or is there some parameter that allows for retraining without having to go through Google again?
you want to just use my phone? Maybe just repeat the question first, and then
Good question.
actually, why don't you just come over here by the mic?
I'm going to say, from a Health Canada official point of view, I don't know.
Your attention please, your attention please. Code blue, mic, wing, first floor, main entrance by the sliding doors. Your attention please, your attention please. Code blue, F wing, mic wing, first floor, main entrance by sliding doors.
For the sake of time, I didn't present my last slide. And on that last slide, it shows the model of FDA's digital health. They're drastically revolutionizing how they're going to look at software as a medical device, which will include AI. They're no longer going to ask for evidence the typical way with a traditional device. We're going to pre-certify companies. We're going to look, the word value was actually used by their director. You're going to look at the value of how they go about their process. I tend to think of it as a Nexus card for a medical device. We're going to go through a rigorous process. The FDA is going to go through a rigorous process, and they're going to pre-certify a company. So you may not, we're going to use post-market evidence to provide a better feedback on how AI might work, because you're not going to be able to show it. You'll be able to show a snapshot in time. You're not going to be able to show how that AI has evolved, their machine language has evolved due to its learning, because you're going to be in a post-market space. So the post-market space is going to become really important as the feedback mechanism into how FDA looks at that. We're looking at that model. I'm not going to say we're going to do that model. I can tell you from my experience with manufacturers now, just on license amendment changes for example, the current regs say that if you change the OS, it's a license amendment. You have to send an application. That's fine for a programmer and you have a Windows OS on it. Not fine because you know how often your iOS is being updated. That would be crazy. The reality of that is you're not interested in that as a manufacturer. I don't have the resources as a regulator to see a weekly license amendment because we have a regulation. We're going to have to change how we deal with this area. And that includes artificial intelligence.
Great. Sorry, in the interest of time, I'll invite people to, Ian, are you going to be around after? He'll be down here at the bottom. It looks like there's a bunch of questions. So, but I think one of the things they really emphasize is a thank you to Health Canada, first of all, for Ian for coming down, and a sense that they're reorienting their directions to be more proactive, reaching out and really focusing on partnering to help move technologies forward, hopefully for the betterment of all Canadians. So again, thank you, Ian, for coming down. Okay, at this phase, we want to kind of shift gears again. We've been kind of moving towards the people that are just getting started. And so at this point, I want to introduce the Medventions Heart team. So one of the teams that went through the internship program in the fall, specifically Paul Kawun, Brianne, Yarranton, Nicole, Barritt, and Mark Davis. And as they're coming up here to talk about their experience, just want to give you a little bit of their background so that you get a sense of the kind of people that hopefully that you might identify with, and that you might want to look at this program. Mark is a first-year interventional cardiology fellow at Sunnybrook, did his training at U of T and McGill. Paul has a bachelor's and a master's of engineering from Queen's in mechanical engineering. Nicole's a third-year biomedical engineering student at University of Waterloo. And Brianne has a Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences from the University of Vermont. So a wide range of backgrounds, and that's one of the things we look for when we're creating these teams, to kind of get different perspectives as they try and address these various questions. So I'll invite them now to comment on their experiences in the fall Medventions program.
Thank you for the kind introductions. For this presentation, we're going to give you a quick overview of our program, and then afterwards talk to you maybe a little bit about what we're doing right now and about what our takeaway messages were from what we did. So the beginning of our program was an absolute crash course in cardiology and working in the hospital setting. We almost had no limits on what we could and could not see. And while we spent primarily most of our time observing interventional cardiology procedures in the cath lab, we were also able to observe other things such as cardiac surgery, the CICU, the cardiac intensive care unit, cardiology clinic, and just a whole more different procedures. We did the majority of our observations here at Sunnybrook, but we were very fortunate to be able to go over to St. Michael's Hospital and observe procedures in a different hospital setting, because we found that a lot of the problems we find are somewhat hospital specific. There's a very sharp learning curve, but everyone encouraged us to ask questions, and we're more than happy to answer anything that we're uncertain about. The main goal of our program is to find a clinical need that's worth solving. And this meant that we went through a process of recording down every single problem that we could find, and then afterwards going through a cutthroat process of elimination that's focusing on the impact of the problem, whether the team was invested in coming up with a solution, the feasibility of developing a solution, and whether it was a hospital-specific or systemic problem. And afterwards, once we cut down that initial list, we delved deeper into each one, investigating the disease state, the existing solutions and devices that are currently commercialized, impact the stakeholders, and market potential. At the end of this process, and it took about a month and a half for us to do this, we had 2 clinical needs that we decided to pursue and continue onwards into the next stage. And the next stage for us was brainstorming, trying to brainstorm feasible solutions and things that made sense. The resources and technology available here at Sunnybrook were key to our creativity and fostering that creativity, because we had almost no limits on what we could and could not make. We got very messy, had things break on us all the time, and became very familiar with the Home Depot down the street. But we were able to successfully show proof of concept for the two clinical needs that we choose to pursue. Okay, so what? We spent 4 months here at Sunnybrook researching, learning, and experimenting. The question on everyone's mind right now probably is, how is this different? And what do you get when you go through this process?
So as Paul mentioned, by the end of our internship, we'd narrowed it down to 2 clinical needs that we wanted to continue brainstorming and prototyping. Our first clinical need was related to the condition called aortic stenosis. So aortic stenosis is a narrowing of one of the 4 valves within the heart, and it can cause symptoms like shortness of breath, chest pain, and fatigue. Once patients begin to exhibit symptoms, their risk of mortality increases to about 75% within 3 years. So of the approximately 200,000 new diagnoses of aortic stenosis in the US every year, about 75% of these cases are considered to be high risk. This means that these are poor cases for surgical valve replacement, which is considered to be the standard treatment for aortic stenosis. Therefore, a procedure known as transcatheter aortic valve implantation, or TAVI for short, was developed as an alternate treatment for these high-risk patients. As Dr. Feld alluded to earlier today, TAVI is different from surgery because rather than cutting the patient's chest open to replace the valve, a system of wires and catheters is inserted into the body via arteries in the groin. These wires are sent up into the heart, and the new valve is sent into the heart where it is expanded to replace the old diseased valve. Up here we actually have a picture from a TAVI procedure that shows the new expanded valve seated where the old diseased valve used to be. So while this procedure is...
Your attention please. Code Whyne for D Delta 4, all clear. Your attention please. Your attention please. Code Whyne for D Delta 4 is all clear.
So while TAVI has definitely benefited many patients, there are still a number of risks associated with the procedure, such as major bleeding and stroke. And while the level of risk is currently acceptable for the TAVI patients that are currently serviced, it is our belief that if and when TAVI is approved for low-risk patients, this will no longer be the case. Therefore, we are currently working on a device to reduce the risk of stroke during TAVI. By the end of our internship in December, we were able to successfully show proof of concept for the method that our device will use to accomplish this goal. The second clinical need we investigated was that of patient monitoring. So many people don't think that patient monitoring is a real problem due to the wide range of devices that are available. However, this is not what we found during our observations. We were able to encounter multiple instances where the reliability and accuracy of these monitoring devices was called into question due to conflicts between what the doctor could directly observe from their patient and what the device was reading out. And this was particularly problematic because these were important devices that displayed patient parameters such as blood pressure and heart rate. So this showed us that when these problems arise, they can cause significant confusion, distraction, and time loss, which can translate into bad consequences for the patient. Also, our conversations with doctors showed us that these problems arose much more frequently than we expected. Therefore, due to what we perceive as this unmet clinical need, we're currently in the process of developing a device to improve the reliability and accuracy of patient monitoring in procedural and acute care settings. So, where are we now? Fortunately, the four of us are still able to continue working on our projects here at Sunnybrook and are currently working to show proof of concept for the solution to our second clinical need. We are continuing to engage with our mentors inside and outside of Sunnybrook and are working towards disclosing to Sunnybrook and applying for IP protection. It is our goal that within 3 to 4 years, we will be able to bring at least one of our innovations to the clinical world. So, having said all that, what did we learn from the whole experience? For myself personally, I must admit that when I applied for Medventions, I was primarily hoping to get out of it a great clinical exposure. I'm hoping to be a doctor eventually, and the prospect of 2 months of uninterrupted shadowing time sounded like a golden opportunity. And Medventions definitely didn't disappoint. Being able to observe all aspects of care in a busy cardiology department and see the challenges that doctors and patients face every day has been the most meaningful clinical experience that I've had yet. And while I expected to enjoy the clinical experience, I was much more nervous for the second portion of the internship due to my lack of engineering background. But I have to say, it was so interesting to learn from my teammates and their engineering mindset, as well as their different approach to problem solving. I was challenged every day, and my teammates encouraged me to take risks and make mistakes, as they welcomed my bad ideas and celebrated when our good ideas paid off. I have to say that learning so much from my team members was undoubtedly one of the most valuable aspects of this whole experience. Finally, one of the things that I think makes Medventions so special is the people that we are fortunate to work with. Whether it was doctors in the cath lab or technicians in the machine shop, we are constantly surrounded by people eager to share their experience and support us in any way that they could. Innovating within Medventions has exposed us to many opportunities that I know a lot of innovators do not have. And I know that the experience we have gained through this internship will be invaluable to us in the future.
So for me, I got the lucky job of being the clinical advisor to the team, which meant whenever I was not in the cath lab, I'd run back and forth. A lot of that involved me telling them, no, stop, or we're not doing this right. But it was a very enjoyable experience to be working with the team members. It actually gave me experience and a lot of experience in mentorship. I've always been a mentee. I've always been below other people. And it was nice to impart some of my knowledge, some of my life experiences, and to help them going forward and what they want to do as careers. And I thought that was a great experience for anybody going through Sunnybrook here to get involved in the Medvention program, is that you get some mentorship skills. I also learned the importance of asking why in medicine. I think a lot of times I just took stuff for granted, that we do stuff because that's just the way it's been done. And working with the team, when they always ask me, why do you do this? Why do you do that? Really made me think about, why do we do something? And is there a better way to do it? And I think that's one of the best experiences you get out of here. It really makes you rethink, is there something more efficient that we can do with what we're doing with any problem we're dealing with currently? Next, where I think I was very helpful, and I think it's for important anybody starting up, is that if you're doing something clinical, you really need someone who has some of that clinical experience. You know, when we met with the group, they'd have a whole list, hundreds of things that they found were problems. And I'd sit there and go through them and say, you know, don't do this, don't do that. And if they didn't have that, I think a lot of times we'd be going down the wrong track. But having somebody there that at least knows what that clinical problem is, and is this, as they mentioned before, a hospital-specific issue, country issue, a financial reason why something's done, is very helpful to preventing people from going down the wrong track really early and getting you back on the right track. And then finally, for myself, I learned really how to navigate the IP and the patent process. Now, sometimes if you come up with an idea and you feel really bad when all of a sudden you find out that somebody just had that idea as well, you may be able to tinker a little bit to still get some of your projects and your ideas out there.
For me personally, I think when a lot of people hear about entrepreneurship, they think of this kind of rosy world, that they have a great idea, have an easy time convincing other people that their idea is great, and have an easy time selling their idea to the world. And if anything, this program showed us was the best way to be introduced to the reality of this world, that you have to learn quick, you have to break things and move quickly, and things will quite often explode on you. You have issues with patents, you have issues with designs, you have issues with prototypes. I'm also 100% convinced that this program is a little bit of an experiment for Dr. Courtney. He's secretly, or maybe not so secretly, trying to figure out what is the best team of people to be able to fit together in order to have the best chance of success, best chance of some success in this industry of medical device innovation. And I say this because when it comes down to it, every team that I've heard or seen gone through this program has been very different. Now, that being said, the team that I got put on with these guys was great. Everyone was super devoted. Everyone had the necessary skills to complement each other. And that's what you need for a team. You get more than just, say, a team of engineers or a team of doctors or a team of somebodies. It's those skills that complement each other and allow you to be better than who you are as an individual. And if anything, the most valuable thing that I got out of this was this connection and relationship with a bunch of people, with my team members and other people in this program, to be able to continue and hopefully work with for the rest of my life in medical device innovation. And with that, we thank you very much for listening to us. We have some people we need to thank, or like to thank, people who have helped us and supported us through this program. At Sunnybrook, all the clinicians, nurses, fellows, researchers, scientists, everyone here who are more than willing to answer our questions, provide mentorship, support, help with the prototyping, huge aspects of this program for us. At St. Michael's Hospital, we'd like to thank Dr. Bagai and the clinicians and nurses there for providing us the opportunity to go there and observe procedures there. And specifically to Dr. Bagai for providing mentorship and some guidance towards our innovations. We'd also like to thank Joseph, and I think I saw Fiona here earlier, so Fiona as well, and the University of Toronto Translational Research Program and the Health Innovation Hub for all their mentoring, their support, the resources they provided for us, the networking and learning opportunities. And with that, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us. We're happy to answer any questions you guys may have.
Thanks. I think you really highlighted a point that Paul made. One of the big myths about entrepreneurship is that it's individual. And I think one of the things that I think the various folks from companies emphasized was it's all about the team in terms of reaching success. Does anybody have any quick questions for the team? Okay. If not, again, thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing more about how things progress in the future. And I think another point that was just made is the Medventions program is very much an experimental science. If we could teach this pedagogically, we would, but I think the key is that we got to try things and we got to do things and see how they work. And until the fall, we were doing all these experiments within the HEART program, which at least we had some control over. We're really grateful to the musculoskeletal program for taking the leap of faith of saying, we want to try this stuff too. We want to see how it fits into our environment. And particularly Cari, Whyne, who is the director of the Holland Musculoskeletal Research Program, who really took a leadership role in expanding this effort with a team in the musculoskeletal program. And I'm going to invite her, and I believe, I don't know if we have some of the members of the team with her. Yeah, okay. Well, the team was Joel Mokhtar, Zaid Atho, and Angela Lynn, and I think Zaid is going to join us as well. But I'll turn the microphone over to Cari to talk about their experience with the musculoskeletal program.
Great, thanks so much, Graham. So it was an interesting opportunity for us to take this on and see how we could translate this into the musculoskeletal program here at Sunnybrook. We're a program that's very large clinically. We have many ambulatory visits, many operations going on. We have 2 sites, the Bayview campus and the Holland Center downtown. We follow patients through the continuum of care. So it's not just about orthopedic surgery, it's much more diverse than that. We have a large educational component to our program, and Medventions seemed like a huge opportunity to integrate that education and take it really in a bit of a new direction. So what are we? In our program, we take into account orthopedics, musculoskeletal anesthesia, rheumatology, rehabilitation. We have a very large team of clinician investigators who work with some of us full-time scientists and research staff. And as we've said in cardiology, we have access to state-of-the-art research facilities, equipment, and a clinical team that's really interested in many ways in translating innovation into clinical practice. what are the areas that we focus on? It's really, there's three mainly, especially with respect to research, and that really aligns with what we might have opportunities in the innovation. And that's arthritis and arthroplasty, musculoskeletal trauma, and bone metastasis, particularly spine. Our research program is quite diverse. So we look at everything from health policy and new models of care through to clinical trials, but we also have a focus also on basic science, which includes innovation and new technology. We have investigators working in clinical, physical, and biological sciences, but it's the integration and pulling of those pieces together that I think gives the opportunity for Medventions to really take hold in our program. Sunnybrook has some new strategic directions that it's coming out with, and one of these is personalized and precise treatments. And what you see at the bottom there is that discovery, research, and technology development is a real focus of Sunnybrook and a focus in its future. And so bringing Medventions into the MSK program made a lot of sense. We have a history of innovation within our program that many of you may or may not know about. This is going through the areas of device development, so new devices, but as well looking at new models of care, how we can do these. We have apps that are going on. We have new small startup companies that are actually getting new technologies into the operating room and also into onto patients and into the home environment as well when we think about rehabilitation. And we're also looking at translating devices and things that have been used in one area and translating them to musculoskeletal applications. What this has done is set in MSK a very open opportunity to bring in and embrace the musculoskeletal part of the Medventions program. And so we've been able to do that. And what's been wonderful about it, I think, is that it's not just been our surgical colleagues that have taken that embracing technology. It's really been every front, from our allied health professionals through to our surgeons and our clinical care teams, to rehabilitation, to casting techs and everyone that we work with, as well as the laboratories and the staff and students in there. And so I'll let the team speak a little bit more, but I think it's really improved the enthusiasm of our program as a whole. We're one of the priority programs here, but it's really given us that extra drive for everyone to say, hey, I have a new idea. Maybe this should work in a different way, to be questioning why we do things in a certain way. And that's been an opportunity from having these students come into the operating rooms and clinics to start that conversation even more. And so it's exciting for us what's happening with the team, but it's the shift of culture, I think, even more that will happen. And so who is our musculoskeletal team? Well, this year it was Joel Mokhtar, who's an orthopedic resident. He's a PGY4, and there's very big buy-in from the University of Toronto and the Division of Orthopaedics to have our residents take part in this program as part of the residency training. Angela Lynn, a biomedical engineering student from the University of Waterloo, and Zaid, who will introduce himself, who's a recent graduate of the engineering science program, biomedical option at the University of Toronto. And I'll turn the floor over to Zaid now.
Thank you, Dr. Whyne, for the warm introduction. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Unfortunately, Joel and Angela couldn't be here, but I'll present on their behalf. I'll start with Angela's experience. For her, as a undergraduate still in biomedical engineering, she found that participating in clinical needs finding was very exhilarating for her. And interacting with clinicians and the other care staff was also very profound of an experience for a biomedical engineering graduate. This Medventions experience also spurred a very stronger interest in medtech design and development for her, and sort of validated her educational and career choices for her. As for Joel, he sort of recorded a video, and I'll play it for you guys to share his experience.
My name is Joel. I'm an orthopedic resident, currently my 4th year of surgical training.
Can you?
I spent most of my clinical rotations with Sunnybrook, and I've always had an interest in identifying and solving orthopedic problems. When I first heard about Medventions, I was immediately interested in this program, as it seemed to be the perfect avenue to further develop these skills. Overall, I can say Medventions was a terrific experience. It really offered a unique combination of clinical observerships, mentorship from world experts, and a formal lecture series and curriculum to tie these two things together. In terms of my own future, Medventions really helped me learn how to identify and validate clinical problems. And I think this is the first and most important step towards developing innovative solutions in healthcare. I'm currently completing a master's degree at U of T, and I'm hoping to continue research here at Sunnybrook in medical device development. At Sunnybrook, medical residents are on the front line of healthcare, and I think we're uniquely positioned to identify problems or gaps in patient care. And this is why I think Medventions is so important. And certainly within musculoskeletal care, I've had numerous residents, fellows, as well as engineering graduates approach me and ask how they can become involved in the program. And so I think the future for Medventions at Sunnybrook is very bright.
As for me, I come from a biomedical engineering background as well, and I'm very interested in medtech entrepreneurship. So choosing Medventions was a very obvious choice for me and a dream coming true, to be honest, because it really allowed a unique opportunity to be embedded in a hospital system, be able to observe clinicians and all of the care staff along with the patients, and be able to discover problems and validate the problems that we discover with the clinicians and with everyone, and also validate the potential solutions that we come up with that team, which is a very rare opportunity for anyone in biomedical engineering to get. In terms of the observations that we made, we had a wide range of cases, including trauma surgery, arthroplasty, and arthroscopy. In addition, we also saw spine surgeries, and we visited fracture clinics, as well as physiotherapy and rehab clinics. And not only did we get a chance to observe clinicians and patients, but I also got a chance to become a patient of Sunnybrook, as I was one day biking towards Sunnybrook and got myself into a car accident. And I was a projectile in the air for the split second. All I could think of was the operations that would be done on me that day. Miraculously, I survived without any major injuries, but it's really moments like these that really help us think and kind of motivate us to keep doing the work that we do, and how important it is to keep doing it. In terms of the need identification and screening stages, we ended up finding about 100 problems, and we filtered them down by quick assessment and quick market research to about 10 needs. And we started doing more rigorous research at this point, as well as started thinking about potential solutions by brainstorming. And we filtered those problems down to top 3 problems. And in this point, we also did more rigorous market research and more brainstorming. We started validating these problems again with more observations and interviews. At this point, we also started doing more proof of concept prototyping and utilizing the Sunnybrook R&D facilities. We ended up choosing one particular problem in the field of arthroscopy. That's our top problem. So in arthroscopy, it's the most common orthopedic surgery done worldwide. There's over 4 million operations done globally, and over 1 million, at least in the million operations, at least in the States, with a total market size of $2 billion. The problem is related to the fact that it still remains a challenge to identify or characterize joint lesions and assess the disease state. And that's applicable for a wide areas in arthroscopies in knee, shoulder, hip, elbow, and ankle. Unfortunately, I can't delve too much into details due to disclosure issues, but because we're still working on our prototype. As we're moving forward, and although the fellowship is over, we're still not. Joel and I are still fortunate to still be part of Sunnybrook, and we're working on improving our prototype. And although it was just 4 months, it was remarkable 4 months of an experience that that really allowed us to sort of pivot our careers, and it was wonderful. Some of the take-home lessons that our group found was that each surgeon may have a different approach and opinion towards tackling a particular problem, And that's very important to take into consideration from an early point in the innovation process, because that could lead to different market segments and ultimately different solutions that can be thought about for each of these segments. Additionally, clinician innovators on the team, someone like Joel, we found were essential in identifying problems that are beneath just plain observation. And they're also very critical in translating between clinicians and the engineers on the team. The other thing is that solutions should be substantially better than what is currently existing for successful adoption. And that goes to say that clinicians may not be so impressed by incremental changes or improvements. Some of the other things is that intellectual property and regulatory strategy skills should be developed in the team and must be considered from day one in the innovation process. Finally, is that we found also that aesthetics and presentation are also very important when communicating ideas with clinicians and asking for feedback. Finally, I'd like to thank all our mentors and clinicians, Dr. Sebastian Tomescu, Dr. David Wasserstein, and Dr. Hans Kreter, Dr. Patrick Henry and their friendly nursing staff. And in the Medventions process, Dr. Cari, Whyne, of course, and the orthopaedics biomechanics lab group, Dr. Courtney and Dr. Ahmed Nassif, and of course the cardiovascular Medventions team. And we're definitely delighted to be the first MSK Medventions cohort. Thank you.
Okay, any quick questions for Cari or the team or Zaid? I think one of the things that I'm not sure if I expected it, that we're seeing is that these 4-month internships seem to be, it's almost becoming the rule rather than the exception, that people go on and want to continue on with their projects. And in a sense, we're now doing the next experiment of how do you get out of that project into getting the IP protected, maybe even moving into a startup. And maybe you can just do a really quick comment as to, what are the issues? How is that getting paid for? Those kind of challenges to kind of get over that, what I believe is considered the first valley of death in this process.
What I can comment on is that I think there are still amazing opportunities around to be at Sunnybrook and have access to the clinicians and everyone here who can help us out with applying to grants and applying to funding opportunities. And also Medventions being partnered with other campus-linked accelerators like the H2I also bring a lot of other opportunities for the teams to be able to apply for additional funding and do competitions and such.
Great.
The one thing I would say to that is that having a resident who's a PGY4 as part of the team ensures that they're going to be around for a few more years. And that is a real benefit, and really we've had so much interest from residents and fellows in orthopedics related to the program as it's gone by. So knowing that they're not leaving right away, that they'll be here, and Joel's actually doing a rotation in trauma at Sunnybrook right now, helps to extend that and continues to make that clinical interaction and the interactions with the lab possible on an ongoing basis.
Great, thank you. Real quick question, Dinesh?
Yeah, a couple of things over here. Are you having any pattern lawyers working with you right from the beginning as part of the journey that allows you to know where is somebody's doing patterns research, somebody's doing some IP research? So the compression of time, what you're talking about, the 4 months is a very small window where you get the most out of it. Having a legal help over here would not be probably unreasonable to consider. So
did you have any advice along the way about patenting intellectual property?
We did our own intellectual property searches from an early point of view, but again, at Sunnybrook, there are the resources to allow us to do that.
And if you decide to do any of this, do you control the IP or the Sunnybrook owns the IP?
So we should have spoken to Michael, to Dr. Julius, who was here earlier this morning. Go ahead.
Yeah. So officially, the fellows are employees of Sunnybrook, so they fall underneath the Sunnybrook intellectual property policy. The Sunnybrook intellectual property means that the IP is assigned to Sunnybrook, but inventors do get 40% of any revenues generated from it. And we are right now working on a new express license, which we hope will roll out soon, which will facilitate very quickly licensing this technology back for people who want to do startups.
So the reason for that question, I have been approached actually recently by Henry Ford Healthcare System. There's so much IP potential that is sitting inside the large healthcare institutions. Somebody has not really created a commercial angle to it and created clinically relevant. So a lot of research goes on, a lot of IP portfolios are created by the large universities, but their attention is a big hotel with a large money coming from a bag and a counter. So sometimes it's not on the radar. So I'm hoping the inventions moving forward from large universities like this.
Yeah, and again, I think that's one of the things that we see as an important aspect of the Medventions program is, again, it's an experimental science, and the experiment is not just with the students, it's with the institution, and the institution is learning what it's got to do to help foster all of this as well. Just maybe a last quick question. Or
Why be so cheap with the 40%?
I'll let you talk to our VP of research on that one. I understand that there's balances that always have to be made, and some institutions do more. Anyway, it's an ongoing negotiation. Okay, and again, I think the teams will be around for afterwards for anybody who wants to follow up. So to finish up the day, the formal part of the day at least, I want to introduce a person who obviously needs no introduction in this crowd, but I'm going to do it anyway. Brian Courtney is really the pivotal founder of this program, Medventions. Brian did his undergrad in engineering, if memory serves me correctly, since it's not written down here, at Waterloo, went on to Stanford and basically was embedded in kind of that culture of entrepreneurship while he was doing his medical training in the Bay Area, where he actually was involved in a couple of startups. And we're very fortunate that he had an interest of coming back to Canada, and that the Sunnybrook environment was enticing to him. So he came back and finished his medical training up here. And we were then able to convince him that he wanted to be a clinician scientist here at Sunnybrook as he started his career as an interventional cardiologist. While in parallel starting a company, he's the CEO, as I'm sure you've already heard, of Canavi Medical. So I'm going to invite him now to come up to close the day with talking about building Canada's medical technology sector, one life-changing device at a time. Brian?
Thank you. So it's been a great day, and we're getting close to the end here, but thank you very much to the Medventions fellows for coming by and presenting their experiences, and all the other speakers that were here so far. I'm also the chair of the Business Relationship Management Committee, often also referred to as the Conflict of Interest Board, so I'm showing my conflicts, just to be clear. You know, the background is that Canada has been generally a net importer of medical devices. We import just over $3 billion of devices a year, and we export 8.6. So the good news is that 5 years ago, our exports were only 1.8, and they've already gone up to 3.1. So that's a pretty big jump. Now, at the same time, our imports have also gone up by the same absolute amount as a result of the fact that we just are using more technology in our routine practice. There are a lot of other countries, and we've heard about Israel, Ireland's another one, Switzerland's another one, where there's a much better ratio in terms of exports to imports with respect to medical technology development. And then the elephant in the room is the United States, which does $100 billion of medical device development a year, and it's a major, major industry, especially if you go to the Bay Area, Boston, Minnesota type regions. The worldwide market is estimated about $350 billion. And if you just look at our trade deficit in medical devices alone, which is on the order of $5 to $6 billion, that actually represents 2 months of our national trade deficit every year. So it's an important sector economically for us, and I think it deserves some attention. If we talk broadly about medical technology relative to other industries, I think that people view advances in healthcare as being intrinsically valuable and are increasingly being recognized as such. As societies advance in North America and everywhere else around the world, if you have an extra dollar to spend in absolute terms, you might want to spend it in healthcare or education. And we're seeing a lot more, I think, growth. If you look at China, how much more of their GDP is going towards healthcare, I think is a prime example of that. We certainly have a boomer effect here in Canada with respect to aging demographics, but that's not unique to us. That's something happening around the world. And people are becoming more higher expectations in terms of what healthcare can do for them. The same way that 15 years ago, if you bought a car, you'd be happy if you got a 3-year warranty. Today, you're upset if you don't get a 10-year warranty. People are having similar expectations on the medical technology side. And so they expect the results of their operations to be more durable. They expect them to be less invasive. They expect them to be more comfortable. They expect them to be more effective. And the data and the interconnection between the patients and the control they have over their healthcare is also an emerging trend that's being enabled by the current technological revolution. At the same time, you have these pressures from payers where they're really trying to control their costs because it is a big area of cost. And we discussed that earlier today. I think more so than almost any other industry is that healthcare is a global industry. If you're developing a new medical technology, you can't just make it for Canada. You have to make it for the world. And that's a real opportunity in terms of why that export-import equation is so important. There's a broad range of skills that are used in developing and manufacturing medical devices. You have professionals, you have finance people, you have marketing, sales, manufacturing, quality assurance. It really employs a broad range of people at various levels of skills, and something that is really an industry that can be very inclusive of the entire Canadian landscape. At the same time, it's highly regulated for very important reasons. There's a very high barrier of entry. There's been a lot of excitement in the stock market and in the investment community over the past 2 years in Canada about cannabis. I don't know if anyone noticed or not. There's about $700,000 of legal cannabis sold so far, but the market capitalization of cannabis companies is on the order of $20 to $30 billion. And it's a weed. It's easy to grow. By definition, it's easy to grow. If you get into medical devices, it's a lot harder to raise money than it has been over the course of the past few years for the cannabis industry. And yet our industry is much larger at present in a legal sense in terms of what we produce. And it's much more protectable from a barrier perspective, from an intrinsic intellectual capability perspective, and it's incredibly valuable. It's a very IP-centric domain. Intellectual property is certainly plays a very strong role. It's got crowded in some areas, but there are huge opportunities. And really, it's limited by our creativity and the efforts that we put into it. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it's got a high barrier of entry. And increasingly, one of the big trends in healthcare is it's dominated by fewer and larger companies. So Abbott bought St. Jude. That took out a $25 billion company that you could potentially rely upon as a potential supplier, integrated into one other supplier. So now you've got a large set of, a small number of very large companies that are dominating medical care. And if you look a little bit further along in terms of how data is becoming important with respect to how healthcare is delivered, and that's important in terms of how healthcare is managed, you can imagine that the Amazons and the Googles and the Microsofts are probably not far off away from maybe scooping up some of what we consider to be the fairly big medical technology companies. So that's a trend that's happening and will continue along. Now in the Canadian context, where does it stand? You've heard about Canada's world-class research. I think we have outstanding training. I think the clinical work that's done in Canada is extremely strong. It's one of the things that brought me back from the United States back to Canada, is just the opportunity to do a lot of procedures with very skilled people as colleagues to learn from was very attractive. We have outstanding engineering schools and technical schools. We have proximity to the largest market in the world, which is just across the border. And we actually have one of the largest single-payer healthcare systems in the world as well. So those should all be good things, but there are some definite challenges and disadvantages to being in Canada as a medical device technology company. And I want to explore a few of the ways around how we can potentially overcome some of those. We don't have a lot of industry experience or anchor tenants. That's changing. You can palpably see that. You know, that jump from 1.8 to 3.1 means there are some companies that are doing well. And we've seen a number of companies in the Ontario area grow from 50 to 100 people to well over a couple of hundred. Multinationals are keeping a lot of their manufacturing and development facilities here. So Medtronic has a big office in Montreal. Fujifilm has an office in Toronto related to a technology that came out of this center. But we still need more industry experience and anchor tenants in order to be successful going forward. I think that the issue of IP has been a difficult one to manage because most of the intellectual property developed in Canada in the medtech space is often tied directly to a university or a hospital setting. And that hasn't always been the easiest place to source intellectual property from. But that is definitely improving through a number of different efforts, and I think you're seeing the proof of that with the results from the University of Sherbrooke and what Soundbite's doing, some of the things that have come out of Sunnybrook and elsewhere in the country. One of the real big challenges, though, of being Canadian is that your home market is small. You make something, you want to try it out somewhere, and you want to build access to the market. And it's not good enough just to get access to the Canadian market. You have to get access to another market, and that's typically the United States. And the regulatory processes in Canada are less easy than they are in the States in some respects. If you look at Health Canada, their medical device bureau has fewer than 100 people doing reviews. You go to the FDA, it's 1,000 people. And yet they look at roughly the same number of applications every year. So you can imagine there are intrinsic reasons why that's difficult. And I'm delighted, Ian, for you to be here today to talk on behalf of Health Canada. I'm really glad that Health Canada is engaged in discussions to see what we can do to advance the regulatory processes so that we can have more innovation come into Canada, but also more innovation being developed within Canada to go elsewhere. If you look at the single payer system, it's great. We pay very little for the devices relative to what you might pay in other jurisdictions because we do have large purchasing groups. Our purchasing programs and the way that we're reimbursed to do procedures and such is really well tuned to buy devices in large quantities that have already been well accepted elsewhere. There's a definite gap, and if you go around and you talk to the Canadian medical device community, there's a lot of frustration in terms of finding centers within Canada that can adopt an innovative technology early on. And so I think that's an important area that needs to be addressed in terms of procurement. And then we've got a federally regulated healthcare system that is paid for by provincial governments. There's a federal innovation agenda, and there's also a provincial agenda. And I think that there needs to be more communication between the federal activities and efforts and the provincial levels and efforts in order to try and make this whole system work in a bit more of a coordinated effort. And then finally, there's some scarcity of domestic comfort in terms of investment with medtech. People are not as familiar with it yet. There haven't been as many success stories, and it is a complicated space. We're used to using things that have been adopted elsewhere. We're not used to developing the new things. Whereas if you go to California and you start talking about the new thing, you'll get 10 or 15 people ready to express interest and move it forward because they already know what the latest thing is. They know where the new idea fits into the landscape that's emerging before them. Just to put this whole single payer thing into some perspective, Health Canada has an annual budget of $4 billion per year. The Ontario healthcare budget is $52 billion a year. Now, the Ontario healthcare budget is what provides the care. Health Canada provides it to First Nations and also does the regulatory aspects of it. If you look at that compared to the largest healthcare organizations in the States, Ascension Healthcare is the largest not-for-profit, and Hospital Corporation of America is one of the largest for-profit organizations, and they typically do about $40 billion worth of care delivery per year. So you can see that Ontario really is a very large player in terms of a payer, and we need to capitalize on that a little bit better than we currently do. So what's our approach? What can we do to try and overcome some of these challenges and take advantage of the opportunities that lay before us? I think we've spoken about encouraging innovation in the Canadian healthcare setting. That's why you are here today. We're delighted that this is the most number of people that have registered and attended to this event, and I think it's a sign of some very positive momentum. The intellectual property landscape is changing in terms of how that's managed at academic settings. The culture within healthcare and within academia is evolving. We have some great infrastructure to support medtech developments. I'll go into a bit more detail on that. Training is a key area. I think anything we can do to help offload some of the work and make it easier for Health Canada to do the reviews and for us to proceed through those reviews, I think would be a very key and relatively low cost path for improving our standing. And then we just need to make sure that we ensure the local healthcare system is willing to be a first adopter as an entry point so that we can start here and then expand elsewhere. And finally, I think all these successes as we move forward will improve people's comfort in terms of putting their careers, their financial interests, and their trust into a growing medical field. So I just want to touch on a few of those areas. Infrastructure, we've been really fortunate here at Sunnybrook to be able to develop world-class facilities for prototyping and validating new technologies. We have a 160,000 square foot facility called the the Center for Research in Image Guided Therapy. Within that is a device development lab that is extremely well equipped to make very small devices, very small components, very intrinsic acoustic devices or optical devices, catheters. And it's a really unique space that when I tour large companies who visit our facility, they're quite surprised with what we have within an academic setting. And we want to leverage that. We want to make that facility available to local industry so that as they want to develop new technologies, they have a home base that they can come to do that in a cost-effective and timely manner. We also have preclinical testing facilities where there are good laboratory protocols so that we can use data generated during preclinical studies and use that in submissions to Health Canada, to the FDA, and to notified bodies. And we're expanding our programs where people have access to clinicians and to get expert engagement. And I think that all those aspects of adding to the infrastructure will be very helpful for people. We've spoken a lot about training. I won't go a whole lot into detail here, but you're aware of, obviously, today as being an important day for us annually. We have our seminar series that's available on the web during the autumn, as well as less frequently, but still ongoing during the winter terms. The digital community for people to meeting with each other is also quite helpful. It is a grassroots process. Really, there are a lot of people locally that have been involved in innovations as leaders. Some of them are retiring, but they're imparting a lot of their knowledge to newer generations of people. And we're seeing the number of people involved in this expanding quite a bit, and some increasing experience from around the world coming to Sunnybrook, and Sunnybrook increasingly being seen as a leader both nationally and internationally in this space. So my favorite way to learn is immersion. I like to get into the thick of things, and I also like to put the students into the thick of things so that they get aware of what's really going on in the trenches and not be relying on superficial, high-level descriptions of things, but to be very face-to-face with where the problems are. And in order to do that, it requires learning from many people in many places and in many situations. Many of the companies that are growing out of this area have been successful and fortunate to travel to places like China, Japan, Europe, Israel, and throughout North America to really build on some of the lessons that are available as you travel internationally and bring some of these learnings back to the people here. Just from a regulatory perspective, when I started my current company, Biomedical, and I said we're building medical devices, they said, good luck, the FDA is really slow. And it was taking 3 or 4 years to get in regulatory applications for Class 4 devices through the FDA. And about 4 years ago, that had a dramatic shift to it. And it's now down to 6 to 9 months. Depends obviously on the class of device and how good the submission is, but there's been an overwhelming dramatic change in terms of how quickly and how interactive the processes are with the FDA, and they've really adopted a least burdensome approach. And Health Canada similarly is undergoing a regulatory review of drugs and devices. They call it the R2D2 initiative. And it's a key priority within Health Canada to see how can medical device review processes be made more efficient and more responsive to innovation. I'm a member of the Council of Canadian Innovators, which is an industry group, as well as the Ontario Bioscience and Industry Organization, and finally MEDEC, which is the Medical Devices Industry Group. And through those organizations, I've been fortunate to talk to the Minister of Health, the Deputy Minister of Health, a number of people within the Medical Device Bureau, and there's a real strong desire on their parts to do what they can to improve the efficiency through which innovations get delivered to Canadians. And this is key because if we can learn faster and fail a little bit earlier while still failing in a safe environment and get better performing products out there, it will greatly improve our ability to globalize what we learn here, as well as to bring technologies to our patients locally. And I think that this is really, as I said before, a relatively low-cost place to invest efforts in order to improve our standing in the international world. And finally, local adoption is key. I think using products that meet the international mark in terms of what you want for clinical care locally is key. There are numbers of examples of companies that have made technologies and sold 30, 40, 50 units in the United States and haven't sold 1 or 2 of them yet in Canada. And I think that we need to explore opportunities for having early adopter hospitals to work with the Canadian innovators and to make that happen, and not wait until it's been proven in jurisdictions outside of Canada before it becomes accepted practice to do so here within Canada. And success breeds success. So I'm just going to finish this off with a few examples of some companies that are local and are making some great progress moving through the commercialization and scale-up phases. We now have scale-ups. We don't have just startups. We have scale-ups that are really growing quite rapidly. And we've spoken about the innovation system quite a bit and all the various key components in terms of idea generation, first seed funding, validation, scale up, industry advocacy, and a number of different areas, training. It's a very complex, but a very dynamic and a very enjoyable ecosystem to work within. So this is a company called 70 Surgical. They recently raised some money. It actually was founded by a neurosurgeon here who's also got a PhD in optical engineering. He's a relatively sharp person, Victor Yang, and he's showing how quickly he can co-register coordinates within an operating room to a preoperative CT scan in order to guide spinal surgeries, make sure that screws are being put in the right place at the right angle to get the right fixation, and they're doing very, very well. There's another company that's a spin-off from Baylis called Anchor Orthopaedics. This is actually something that was developed in part through Sunnybrook, where patients with spinal problems can get a discotomy, so repair of the disc, by using a simple, minimally invasive technology in order to repair the disc in the spine and improve their symptoms. Baylis also has been around the world with a needle that makes a hole inside the heart in order to facilitate a number of procedures that take place in the left atrium. This is not standard of care in Canada, but it's actually used in about 30% of cases in the United States and over 80% of cases in Japan, where you need access to the left atrium. And so this is really a company that has done extremely well as a result of its international relationships, international markets it's been able to access, where rather than using a mechanical needle to make a hole in the heart, they're using an electrode to make a precise hole in the heart to get access to the left atrium. This is another company out of Waterloo. It is involved in terms of making accurate alignment of hip prostheses and hip repairs. It involves both a digital data imaging component as well as a hardware component, where they're able to fixate an imaging camera within the operative suite that's fixed to the pelvic bone in order to make sure that alignment of the femur as it gets as part of a hip replacement is done accurately in order to avoid some of the complications that can happen with a poorly aligned result there. And then this is my own company, Biomedical. Our first product makes imaging catheters that look inside the heart that help people see where they're going to the heart. It actually is used in conjunction with a needle similar to what Baylis uses to make a hole in the heart. And this video down here shows a video of Dr. Verma at Southlake making an indentation in the septum of a heart to get access to the left atrium, which is where the procedure takes place. And so this has involved a number of international relationships. We recently closed the financing in China. I was at a number of hospitals in China as a result of this effort. I've been to a number of hospitals in Japan and received great input from Japanese physicians in terms of what they would like from our technology going forward. So just to bring up our approach, it's encourage innovation, have infrastructure, train people, do what we can to make sure that the regulatory system is working as efficiently, make it a real strong asset for Canada as to why doing business in Canada is a good move, while still making sure that nothing is compromised on patient safety and efficacy. And then what does success look like in 5 years? We're going to have about 20 teams go through the Medventions program in the first 5 years. My hope is that 5 of those teams have products that are being used clinically as a result of ongoing efforts. I think that we're on track to that based on the energy and enthusiasm and the quality of the ideas that are coming out of the program thus far. And we want to have a vibrant ecosystem where Canada is seen as a leader in medtech development, as a source of best-in-class technology, where we have leaders in clinical adoption of successful technologies that improve care, and really strong regulatory, clinical, and academic environments to support innovation. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for your attendance, thank our sponsors, and thank all of the speakers that came by to make what I thought was a very exciting and interesting day. So thank you.